All right. So, Laura, thank you very much for taking the time out to be on the podcast.
Very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking your time to join us today. Could you just briefly give the listeners an overview of who you are and what it is you do now?
Of course. So my name is Laura Tilt. I'm a registered dietitian and a health writer. My journey into nutrition started over 10 years ago. So I started with a bachelor's in nutrition, bachelor's degree in nutrition at Sheffield. And then I moved to London and I was to do a master's in public health nutrition. At that point, so I did it part-time, and I was working at the time for a company who they were like a pedometer company, so they were sort of focused on corporate health, and when I was with them I ended up writing a weight management program, which was commissioned into the NHS. So I was kind of quite I was just like heavily involved in looking at the research into weight management, and I was also quite interested in the kind of psychological sides about behaviour change and habits. So that was a big part of my work for a while, and then I went back to study to be a dietitian, and that was more like a desire to get some clinical skills and just sort of fill that gap. And after I qualified as a dietitian in 2012, I was working in a hospital for a bit, which had a more clinical focus, and I ended up specialising in gastroenterology, so basically anything affects the digestive tract. And then a few years ago, I decided to sort of start working fully on a freelance basis, and I do various things. So right now, gut health, we were just sort of chatting before about the fact that that's become quite a big focus. So some of my work around is around that at the moment. So I launched a program in January for people with IBS. But I'm also working on a program, an app for mums at the moment to help them with healthy eating and sort of weight loss after giving birth. And I still have one-to-one clients, so still work with people, which is, I mean, sometimes it's to do with IBS, but most people want support with weight loss, I think, when
Yeah.
they see me. So, yeah, and then that's not a nutshell, is it? But
No, it's fine. I mean, they never are. They never are. But it's great to hear the journey from what you've done previously to where you are now, and also to hear the diversity within the people that you work with and the stuff you do now as well. It's good to kind of hear that variety. It must keep you very busy.
yeah, I am very busy, but I actually think I wouldn't like it any other way. And I think, in nutrition, that's so broad. Like when you're working in nutrition, like there's so many different applications and areas that you can get involved in. And I really kind of quite strongly believe that you can only really, I don't mean be good at a couple of areas, but be focused in a couple of areas.
Mm.
And so you end up sort of through your career, at some points I've been, like I said, I was doing the hospital work, and then I came out of it, and now I've sort of much more been focused on gut health. And I guess sort of the weight loss parts of it are the things that have been most strong for me over the last couple of years. But I've also been through periods where I've done more in sports nutrition, so it's great because it's such a diverse career. But also I think you have to accept that you can't know about everything. You have to sort of choose your areas of focus.
Very true. Yeah, yeah. And also, as you said, you'll probably devote years of your life to one of those areas, and then if you want to switch, it's kind of maybe going back to not so much square one, because I guess there's a foundation level, isn't there? And then you can specialize like anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's great. Like as you move on with life, your interests differ, don't they?
Yeah, of
Um,
course. Yeah.
but yeah, the gut health topic is fascinating. We'll obviously, queue up another whole podcast for that, because I obviously brought you on more to talk about mindful eating and particular weight loss. As you said, you
Yeah.
still work with quite a few weight loss clients.
Hmm.
So before we get into sort of the nitty gritty of it, what would you define as mindful eating as a concept?
Yeah, it's not a tricky one, but there's several ways of describing it. I guess before we talk about that, it's helpful to clarify what mindfulness is first.
Yeah.
Then we talk about how it applies to eating. So mindfulness is basically paying attention to like what's going on right now in this moment. So, most of the time we're quite on autopilot. So thinking about like, might be walking along the road, but we're thinking about a meeting we're going to have this afternoon. So we might completely miss like the surroundings, or where someone's talking to us, but instead of actually kind of hearing what they're saying, we're already planning what we're going to say next.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite rare that we're sort of like fully engrossed in the moment. We might get sort of periods of it where you're on top of a mountain, like looking out, and you're like, wow, it's so beautiful, and you're really absorbed in that moment. But that's quite rare for us, because most of the time sort of our minds are sort of bouncing from one place to the next. So mindfulness is the practice of bringing your attention to what's going on right now, being fully present and aware of all your thoughts and feelings, but just observing them without being judgmental about them. And so if we think about how this applies to eating, well, most of our eating is quite mindless as well. So most of us are on autopilot with our food choices. And I think there's some studies that show we make about 200 food decisions a day, but we're probably only present for maybe a handful of those, if that. So it can be anything from we always just choose the same cereal and pour out the same amount because that's what we always do, to getting home and it's quite a reflex action to just open the fridge without even thinking about whether you're hungry. It's just the natural thing that you do, and you go and you look, or maybe it gets to kind of 4 o'clock every day, and you always have a chocolate bar because that's kind of the habit that you've got into, and we're not really asking ourselves if we're hungry at that time, or what else might be going on for us. So most of our eating is mindless and automatic, and so mindful eating is a way of approaching eating that asks to kind of get us off that autopilot and sort of stops us eating in response to habit and triggers, and actually helps us to tune into our natural kind of inbuilt systems for regulating food, which is hunger and satiety. And sometimes we eat out of hunger, but quite often we eat because the clock tells us it's time to, or because there's some delicious food that's gone past, and that's absolutely fine and normal, but it's all about the amount. It's kind of the percentage of time that we're eating on autopilot versus the percentage of time that we're eating for triggers and emotional reasons. And what we usually find is that when we are relying on food as a coping tool, or we're eating more in response to triggers and automatic habits, that's when we can become overweight and develop more challenges with maintaining a healthy weight.
Of course, yeah. All that kind of yo-yo diet mechanism where people sort of go in and out of weight loss and weight regain because they're just sort of unsure of how to regulate their food, potentially without rules and systems.
Yeah.
Which obviously we'll go into, but so many great points there about obviously mindfulness as a concept. First of all, that being aware in space, because as you said, we're in such a fast-paced world now, and a very instant gratification world as well, where everything's giving us rewards, signals, things like that, and it can be very hard to just take stock and take a moment to actually appreciate what's going on. And yeah, the food cues of today, we know that that's one of the biggest drivers of wanting to eat, is just the fact that we have so many cues for junk food. It's available everywhere at a low cost, and as you said, people get stuck in those ideas of reward, like stress and feeling sad, and that probably comes from upbringing. If you scratch your knee and you get an ice cream.
Yeah. And also, I think, it's really easy to label emotional eating as wrong, or like, oh, I'm an emotional eater, it's really bad. But actually, like, food is a coping tool. Like, let's be honest, and it's a valid one, because temporarily it does sometimes help us feel better.
Yeah.
But if food is our only coping tool, so if food is the only thing that helps when we're feeling, or it's our kind of go-to when we're feeling down or stressed, or you've had a shit day, or whatever, then that's when it can become a problem. And actually, it's just about thinking how often sort of we're using food or relying on food versus other activities or kind of ways of relaxing or de-stressing.
Yeah.
And then it's not that we have to stop eating at all in response to emotions, but it's the whole sort of concept of mindful eating is just bringing our awareness to like how often we're doing it with consciousness. So actually, rather than just ending up in, face down in a box of ice cream and you get to the end and you're like, where did that even go? So being really conscious about our choices, and then just tuning into like how it makes us feel afterwards. And when you get people to do that, quite often they'll come back and realize that it doesn't feel really good to overeat. And actually, if what's the lady that I did some training with, she was saying like comfort food isn't comforting if it makes you feel bad afterwards, which I think is really true.
And I think everyone could probably relate to that feeling, couldn't they? Where they, as you said, they turn to that ice cream when they're emotional, and then afterwards they'll actually feel more guilty. And that probably comes with relationships of food as well. The whole, that was a bad choice because it's bad food, which is a whole separate issue altogether. With this concept of mindful eating, then how did you first come across the idea of, because mindfulness is very it's not 21st century, I guess, but it has been very popularized recently,
Yeah.
through apps like Headspace and more people reading things like The Daily Stoic and Obstacle is the Way, that type of thing. People are sort of adopting that mantra more. So how did you first come across it with regards to eating?
So yeah, I was aware of mindfulness. Kind of, I started like a meditation practice like probably like 5 years ago. So I knew about the benefits, not in relation to eating, but just kind of more generally. But really, the way that I came to mindful eating is that I was finding that I was seeing some clients again and again. So they would come to me for weight loss. We would, I'd write them a great plan and they'd stick to it and everything would be great and they'd get to their goal weight and off they'd go. And then it'd come back to me like a year later or 6 months later and they'd would describe it as they'd fallen off the wagon or, something, life had happened basically. And they had, gone back to old habits. And, I started to wonder whether I was actually doing the right thing by, giving them a diet or supporting them in that way. What I was missing in terms of like what I wasn't giving them that would equip them to regulate their eating in the long term. Because as you said, whilst a meal plan can be super helpful, especially in the early stages, you don't want somebody to be following that all the time. You want someone to be able to go out for dinner. You want someone to be able to go on holiday and actually regulate their eating and have enough confidence in their own ability to do that. So I was like, I felt like I was at a crossroads. I'm not really sure, maybe I just need to step away from weight management altogether and then I came across this book, called The Joy of Half a Cookie, which was written by a psychologist called Jean Christella. And she had basically, the book was all about a program that she'd put together called MB Eat, or Mindfulness-Based Eating Awareness Training. It's a mouthful.
Yeah.
This is essentially, she actually worked with John Kabat-Zinn, who has sort of been nicknamed the father of mindfulness,
Right.
in the 90s. So she was kind of aware of his work, and she was also working with other colleagues at Yale University, so who were looking at how external triggers can make us override our hunger, and how the taste of foods affects what we eat when we have lots of different flavors. So kind of looking at all these learnings and research from her colleagues, and looking at how mindfulness could increase somebody's self-confidence and their ability to regulate their own behaviors. And she basically put together a mindful eating program, which she first of all used in the late 90s. I first studied was with people with binge eating disorder. What they found was over a period of 6 weeks, the practices or the program actually helped to reduce the number of binges that people were having. And then that kind of pilot study went on to sort of be the background for National Institutes of Health funded study, which was kind of like they had a bigger group of people going through the program. They added different elements to it. And over a series of sort of 10 or 20 years, she did sort of several studies around how mindful eating could help improve people's eating habits and as a result help with weight loss. And so that really struck me, which was great, because I was like, here's something which does have some research behind it, which is great. And also it was all about putting control, giving control to the client and actually helping them to make the choices themselves. And I had read other books around the same time, because I sort of thought, okay, mindful eating, this sounds really interesting. I did actually read several other books, but what I found about those books were they were quite spiritual.
Right.
I think this is people's kind of sometimes concern, like apprehension around mindfulness. It's like seems a bit woo-woo. And some of the books were written from like a Buddhist perspective, or they were very heavily spiritual. And this was mindfulness was the base of the program. So they all, throughout the program, people were encouraged to do mindfulness practice every day, but you didn't have to be spiritual, religious. There wasn't any element like that to it. And I found it quite straightforward and very accessible as an entry point, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. I think, as you said there, that can be first response to that idea, like mindfulness around food, like, are you mental? Like, where are you coming from type thing? And especially because, as you said, it all boils down to habits at the end of the day. Like, all of our habits around food have just ingrained from years of behavior that we're now not even aware of. and this idea of actually being present and aware of what you're doing can then actually give you the power to change those habits, because otherwise you're just going to be running on autopilot around food. And then, as you said, if you're not following the weight loss prescription that you've been given, you're like, what do? You're off the diet. And it's that mentality of on-off switch, all or nothing thinking, which gets people into that yo-yo diet trap in the first place.
Yeah, you're right. And I think mindful eating is a bit of a process of self-discovery. So it isn't a quick fix, and it's not a plan to follow, but it's, if you're at the point where you're kind of willing to try something different, it's a really helpful tool to learn about how you are around food. And habits are automatic, they're automatic. Like, the reason we're able to get through our day as we do is thanks to habits, because really had to overthink, like brushing our teeth or getting to work, we'd get nothing done if everything was very cognitive and like really heavy on, like, it's like when you're learning to drive, you're like, oh my goodness, how am I going to remember to do all these things at once and have someone talking to me or have the radio playing? It feels like a completely alien idea, but eventually it becomes natural, and then all of a sudden you're driving, you might be chatting on hands-free, or like, and you're just there, you don't have to think about it anymore. And I think most of our habits, they're quite cognitive at the time. We have to really think about what we're doing, and then they become part of who we are. And a lot of the food habits that we developed, like when we were younger, we've just kept them, and we haven't necessarily thought about whether they serve us anymore. And I think it's just that process of like checking in with yourself and thinking about whether the choices that you're making around food are helpful for you. And if not, then it's starting the process of changing them.
Yeah. And as you said, it's not a quick fix, is it? It's not a definitive program. There aren't rules and boundaries around it. And so for a lot of people, that would probably turn them off, because unfortunately we are in this world where you can get everything now. And unfortunately people want that with weight loss, which is why there's such an increased demand for, diet shakes, pills, fat, and all the fad approaches, because people literally just want the solution now, as opposed to they don't want to think about it. So I guess with this concept, you do get people who are like, okay, I've tried like X amount of diets now and I'm totally fed up, like just give me the answer, I'm willing to put the work in. But for other people who are maybe a bit more apprehensive about it, they want, give me a plan. Is there a way for you to incorporate mindful based eating with a weight loss program so that you kind of get the best of both worlds?
I think actually it's probably the way that I use it most.
Right.
And look, there are some people who criticize using mindful eating as a support mechanism for weight loss, because I think it does, parts of mindful eating do mirror like the intuitive eating movement. But for me, when I read about mindful eating, when I read about MB Eat, like, it was always used as a way of helping people improve their eating habits, and then as a result, usually weight loss happens if it needs to. It's kind of it's a way of improving your relationship with food, and then learning more about how you are with food. But the way that I have used it kind of over the last few years is, like using it as a tool, like in conjunction with lots of other things. So if we look at weight loss, obviously you've got the diet side, but it doesn't necessarily mean following a diet plan. For some people, yes, but other people, you much more focus on habits, or like small changes. But I think when most people kind of arrive set at my doorstep, or like arrive sort of wanting help, and they've got quite low confidence about whether they can do it or not. So actually a meal plan initially is quite helpful, because it gives them some structure and actually improves their belief in the fact that they can actually lose weight. But then we might start at the same time introducing some techniques, or what I might do while I'm putting together a plan for them is ask them just for a few days, when they go to eat, is just to ask themselves, are they hungry or not? Just every time, like nothing else at that point. Just, am I hungry? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, brilliant. And if the answer is no, just being curious about what else might be going on at that time. Are they, did they find themselves in the fridge and they're like, I'm not really sure why I'm here, but I did just, I'm feeling a bit bored right now, or so just kind of checking in, and just to keep like a bit of an inventory of that. And then we'll chat. And already, just for doing that for a few days, they've got so much information. They'll come back and they'll say, oh my goodness, I've realized XYZ, I've started to see these patterns already. And so you're already kind of introducing like the curiosity with them.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then I think the way I use it is more on sort of like a responsive basis to whatever's going on for them. So with my clients, I get them to check in at the end or the start of each week, and we talk about like what's good, what's challenging, and like what the next steps will be. And so when various things that come up that are challenging, so they might have said, I'm going out for dinner this week, and normally that's like a real minefield for me because I just find myself overeating. So that's when we'll think, okay, well, like how could we bring some mindfulness to this like situation? Like how could you check in with your hunger like before you start eating? Could you midway through your meal check in to see how I'm feeling? Because most of us just work to the end of our plate without even actually checking in. Am I still hungry? Does this food taste good? And do I really want to finish it? So I think mindful eating techniques can work brilliantly alongside a plan. I think a plan is really helpful initially, but then as you move forward on a weight loss journey, I think the more tools that you can give people to support their choices so that eventually they get to the point where they're like, I don't need you. Like that's brilliant. That's ultimately where I'm sure us as nutrition professionals, personal trainers, that's the space that we would love every client to get to.
Yeah. Like we want to be referred rather than have return clients.
Yeah.
You want people to be able to live without you, live without apps, live without plans, and everything in between.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, isn't it? Because the more we rely on, as you said, there's a place to give people meal plans, potentially give them like a calorie tracker, that type of thing, to improve their awareness at first and to give them an overview of where they should sit. But the more that you rely then on these cues to tell you when to eat, the more you're actually moving further away from figuring this out for yourself, because you're always relying on an external cue.
Yeah.
What would this is a little bit away from, it's very much within the topic, but what I guess would you say to someone who would say, well, I'm always hungry, that's why I'm in this position? Like those types of people that are like, I definitely am hungry when I eat. Like that's why I struggle with my weight, because I'm overeating, because I'm starving all the time. I guess what would your answer be to those people about just, trust me, check in? What would you have strategies for those types of people?
So I guess sometimes that we have like a narrative about ourselves. So I'm always hungry, or, I'm someone that doesn't like exercise, or we have certain beliefs about ourselves, which sometimes, might have some truth in them and sometimes they're not. But what I would probably encourage someone to do in that case is to, do, so one of the tools that you can use with mindful eating is keeping like a hunger diary.
Mm-hmm.
So not just checking in, like, so you would check in before you eat, like, am I hungry? Yes or no. But then you would try to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. So like 0 is like gas tank is empty. I'm quite raging right now. I've got the hangry thing going on.
Yeah.
And like 5 is kind of like neutral, like comfortable, and then 10 is like I'm overstuffed, like I'm lying on the sofa with my jeans unbuttoned.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess just as for them to keep just an inventory for like a week or a few days, just to work out like what how are they hungry before they eat and how hungry they are. And I think something that tends to happen with a lot of clients, or that I've seen, this is maybe more in female clients, is that they tend to ignore their hunger cues. What will happen is they will maybe eat breakfast at 7, and then they'll go out, and probably if they were to tune in, there's some maybe like hunger signals going on at 10, 11 in the morning, like 4 hours after eating. But they just tend to ignore them, and they'll just sail on through until maybe like 1 or 2 when their meeting finishes. And by that point, they're so hungry that they don't make great decisions, and they will overeat. So, or there's a natural tendency that if I skip breakfast, I'll save calories, or, I won't snack in the afternoon because like that's more calories, but they're not listening to the fact they are actually a bit hungry at that point. And if they override it, they will get home and their dinner will be twice as big.
Right.
And I think what we need to recognize is that physiologically, like, hunger starts and it can be quite quiet. It might be like a little grumble, or, and then it gets kind of louder and louder.
Mm-hmm.
And if we get really, really hungry, like, we don't make good decisions. I don't make good decisions when I'm really hungry,
No.
even knowing what I know,
Mm.
because you get to that point and it's like everyone out the way. If I don't eat now, like something bad's going to happen.
Yeah.
So some of it is about learning to tune into your cues and then kind of not override them. And actually, I've had a lot of people who then started having like a snack in the morning, in the afternoon, and they found that I'm now like, I don't overeat because I'm actually, my appetite's much more regulated. And that's not true for everybody, because some people get on really well with eating 3 times a day. They don't snack. That's what works for them. But the whole point of this is like actually listening to your body, like tuning into your cues, and just observing. Like, so what happens if I eat a snack in the afternoon versus not eating a snack? And I think you're right. One of the things that we do when we follow a diet plan is, yes, they're useful, but we tend to give away like all our decisions. We're like, oh, I'm gonna just, this is the plan now. And we stop listening to any of our internal cues. And in the MBE program, the way they kind of separate the two, which I think is quite nice, is they talk about inner and outer wisdom.
Okay.
Outer wisdom is like, you know, everything we know about calories and nutrition information, and, you know, what your dietitian or your nutritionist or personal trainer will tell you to support you. So it's all like the wisdom and the science behind it. And then inner wisdom is like how hungry you are, like what kind of foods feel good in your body, how much you need to eat to feel satisfied, and how, you know, what's going on with food and emotions and that type of thing. And what you're trying to get to the point of with mindful eating is cultivating your inner wisdom. So you're listening to those cues, and then you're taking what you need from the outer wisdom, and together they're kind of making up to 100%.
Right, brilliant. Yeah, because that's a great way then for those to work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, just to give a small recap of, because you've made some brilliant points there for the listeners. You know, that whole idea of you need to find the schedule that suits you as opposed to following someone else's. And so some people, as you said, might be able to skip breakfast as a strategy in order to say, right, okay, because I know I'm going out for dinner tonight, so I'm not going to make a stupid decision. I'll have my snack at like 10 or 11, have a smaller lunch, miss the afternoon snack, and just power on until dinner. But then I won't overeat at dinner. It's just so that I have a bit more room to play with. Whereas other people would be like, crap, like I can't eat now because there's only chocolate available and that's bad. And then they get to lunch and you're right, it's like I'll have double the amount that they would have done if they just observed their hunger and allowed themselves some food. So I thought that was brilliant, because for those of you listening out there, you just need to find what works for you. And if you are hungry, then have a snack, have some fruit or something at work, like make a decision that's going to keep you a bit more full, and just be aware of it. And then that final point you said about let's combine inner and outer wisdom, I think that can work brilliantly for people who are either using something like MyFitnessPal, following a meal plan, but they're trying to figure this kind of thing out for themselves. Because I guess as someone who works more within sports nutrition, it's the biggest question I get is like, how many calories should I be on? Like, but my Fitbit said that I burnt this many calories through this exercise. It's like, well, that can be like, that's not even 20% accurate. You know what I mean? It's not even within 20% margin. But that's like people's biggest question, is that they're like, I need to know the exact amount of calories I should be eating to lose weight, because otherwise I either undereat or I overeat. And people are just in that kind of like gray zone now, where they're like, they need that external factor, I guess, just to validate what they're doing.
Yeah. And that can be a helpful tool, but it, I think, as you said, then if you're only going on that and you're like, oh my God, I can't track my food today, what am I going to do? That sends you into a spin. That's probably a bit of a signal. And again, being kind to yourself, like not criticizing yourself, but just also with mindful eating, there's a big element of curiosity in it, as in, just trying to, where possible, leave your judgments at the door. So, when you're looking at a food diary, or, however, if you are tracking your food, or you're doing a hunger scale, for example, is just nothing's good or bad. It's just interesting, it's kind of, what happens if you do skip breakfast? Like, does it end badly, for you? I literally have people who are like, if I don't eat every 2 hours, like, things start to cave in.
Yeah.
That's what works for them. And equally, I have, I've got another client I'm thinking of, and she has always and only ever eaten like 3 what we would probably call square meals a day. That really works for her. And so sometimes I'll discuss like approaches with people, and then my advice is like, go and try it and let me know how you get on with that. And I think this is the process that you want to be, as someone listening, if you are sort of approaching weight loss, like these are the kind of conversations you want to have with your coach or your trainer, is like reflecting on each week and kind of being like, okay, this is what happened, and actually then strategizing for the week ahead, and trying out different things and seeing what works for you. Because in the same way that, some of us love HIIT training, like some of us don't. So, it's finding something that fits with you. And I think people have a concern that, oh my goodness, well, if I just eat when I'm hungry, I just will never stop eating. And again, I would say, I know it's quite, because we kind of we've sort of lost trust in ourselves really. But all I would say to someone is like, if you could have the faith to experiment with it, if even only for like a week or two, most people realize that actually they don't overeat. Like if they're truly in tune with their body, they will realize that they do get those signals that tell them when they've had enough. It's just that usually we ignore them or we're doing something else. So another kind of tool within mindful eating is eating without doing anything else. So if you look at a day, I mean, I did it this morning. I had a run, I got back, and I was spooning in the granola and yogurt while I was looking at the emails. And then sometimes, again, that happens. And, I'm not saying that every meal should be like gourmet or like, that you're never going to be doing something else. But if you eat when you're distracted, you tend to miss the signals that tell you you've had enough. And so it's quite easy just for the only signal to stop eating to be an empty plate. And actually, how do you know, like, whether that's too much or, the right amount? So by starting to have maybe like one meal a day where you don't do anything else, and just kind of really seeing if you notice how your hunger changes throughout a meal. And sometimes it's a difference, like you'll have put another mouthful in and then you suddenly think, oh, I actually think I've had enough, and actually then we have to face lots of things like it can feel uncomfortable to throw food away or stop eating until the end of the plate. And that in itself is they're tough habits to undo.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's conversations I've had with so many people about that distraction-free eating and actually being able to tune in and check in. Because as you said, it's not that we don't know how much we should be eating, because actually if we honored the body, we probably would know. But it's potentially the choices that we're making maybe aren't filling us up as much as they could be, because, as you and I both know, things like protein, vegetables, fiber, like the quote unquote good food, what's going to fill you up more than some junk. But that doesn't mean that either's better or worse. It's just making certain choices that are going to fuel you maybe for a longer period of time. And I think the biggest barrier I definitely come up with, especially with my busier clients, people who work in London like yourself. I mean, London, I used to live there as well. What a place to be if you want to live in a distraction zone, right? Like everyone's completely mindless. You sit on the tube and everyone's in their own world. No one talks to each other. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone's borderline miserable, especially now that I live in Leeds and see what the like, hello, it's like, oh my word, someone's speaking to me, what's going on? But I think the biggest kickback I get is like, I can't find the time to not have my lunch at my desk. And it's sort of having that conversation. Well, actually, if you had the lunch away from your desk, would you, one, enjoy it more, and two, probably be more productive when you got back there? But as you said, it's maybe about starting smaller and saying, okay, well, what meal can you have that's away from the desk?
Yeah, I think it's and it's crazy, isn't it? We actually literally sit and think about that statement. I don't have time, 20 minutes, like to actually like fuel my body. It's kind of crazy. But there's some really interesting research that shows that when we're distracted, so when we're eating, so we eat more and we feel less satisfied for it. And then we go on to eat more later. So they've done some quite interesting studies where they'll get people to play computer games or whilst they're eating, and how much they eat, and then like 2 hours later they'll offer them a plate of biscuits, and then they'll run a similar experiment where they ask them to eat and they're not distracted, and then they get offered the biscuits again. before they have to rate how full and satisfied they feel. And yes, when we're distracted, because our attention is somewhere else, we don't feel as full after eating, we don't feel as satisfied, and later on we go on to eat more. It's not clear why that is, but possibly it's because we don't really remember the meal that we had, and so we're going on to kind of look for that satisfaction elsewhere. And the kind of the way that I sort of say to people, to have you ever had this experience, is you've been maybe at work and working on something, and you've got your lunch out, and you've been really hungry, you were really hungry, you got your lunch out, started eating, and 5 minutes later the spoon hits the bottom of the bowl, and you're like, where did that, like, literally, where did that go?
Yeah.
Disappointed, because you're like, I'm hungry and I didn't even, I wasn't even there for the meal.
Yeah.
It's a bit like going to cinema and reading a book, like in the movie. Like, you're not going to get full benefit or like pleasure out of either, because you're not there or there. You're just split.
You're in between.
Yeah. And so as much as maybe it's not the first thing to work on, because it feels like that's like, too much of a challenge, but I think it's worth experimenting with once or twice, even for people to have a meal without doing anything, and just, again, experiment, see how you feel. And I remember when I was doing some training in mindful eating, and I had these sort of tasks to go out and eat without, doing anything else, which I felt was like, oh, this is so boring. Like, literally, I was like, oh, I could be getting things. But every time I would be eating, and then suddenly I would find that I was like not interested in the food anymore.
Yeah.
And it would always be before the end of the meal, like the plate wouldn't be empty. And I was like, oh, okay. But I would never notice those signals, or I do never notice them if I am busy doing something else while I'm eating.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a useful experiment to try.
Definitely. I think it's useful to have the different tools in the box that you can use at different points. And so potentially having a mindful eating checklist that you keep on the fridge next to your to-do list, where you can have the different tasks, and having that array of things, of like having more awareness, maybe eating without distraction. The act of slowing down itself, I guess, even if you're eating with distraction, it's like, okay, you eat, if you have to eat at your desk, I'm not going to try and combat that now, but potentially take an extra 3 to 5 minutes or whatever, set yourself an egg timer, whatever you need, to potentially then facilitate the same response of being more aware of when you're full, knowing when you stop, and having the permission to stop. As you said, there's quite a stigma against throwing away food or leaving food.
Oh yeah, and that mostly comes from ourselves. Like, I do, so a client, she's gone on holiday this week, and what we discussed today was, do you remember that you can give yourself permission to stop eating before the plate's finished? And that can be really hard. It can be a bit like, but I wanted to eat that. And that's a real challenge. And there's several ways of getting around that. Like, I have zero problems now, like saying, oh, can I wrap this up to take it home?
Exactly. Yeah.
But, if you don't like food waste, and actually, yes, it is an important thing to recognize, like, but can you just put those few mouthfuls in the fridge, and then over a few days, then you might have a whole meal or something. And, another one of my clients, and she kind of sort of says, I realized that if I was just putting it into my body, it was a bit like treating my body like bin. And that was something that resonated with her. But I think with all these things, like you said, having this toolkit and just trying them out and seeing what really works for you, because it will be different things for different people.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong with it.
No.
I was chatting to a client of mine just this week about the idea of, the idea of being more present, having the permission to eat what you like, because that's what people come with, really, is this food aversion, as we've talked about a little bit, like good versus bad food. And if you actually say, no, like, you have the permission to eat what you like, it's just more of a case of what do you actually think is going to be best for you in that situation? Can you take your time with it, actually enjoy and taste it? Like, as you said, if we rush our food, we end up and we're like, where did that go? Like, I was really looking forward to that meal, and now I've actually not even clocked it. And I mean, the cinema's the worst place for it, isn't it? People just like shoving their mouths full of actual, what's actually not good popcorn. But you're doing it because it's just like, and probably we know as practitioners, most calories probably come from the evening for most people, because they're bored, distracted, or emotional, or all of the above. So it's definitely yeah, giving people a wide array of tools to practice, get used to it, see what works for them. And as you said, trust in yourself that you can do it. I think that's the thing
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. You made a really good point there about the whole like making the right choices for you. And
Mm.
research shows that mindful people might think it's flaky, like, oh, mindful eating, but
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
there is research behind it. But also the research shows that it increases our ability to self-regulate. And
yeah.
in this respect, we're talking about our ability to make good choices for ourselves.
Mm.
And sometimes when we put like foods, so I had a client called Ben. I know he won't mind me talking about him. Like a couple of years ago, he came to me for weight loss, and one of his like nemesis, if you like, was Domino's pizza on a Friday.
Right.
Get with his kids, and after we'd been like working together for a while, and he'd sort of been like really tuning in, he came back to me and he's like, I don't even like that pizza. He's like, it tastes awful. And he's like, I've really started to, I stopped looking at it as like being a bad food, which made him just want it more. And like when he got it, he just had to shovel it in really fast.
Yep.
Is he started really tasting it, and he was like, doesn't even taste great. And he, this last time that he ate it, he was like, I just stopped halfway through this slice and I was like, I don't even want this,
Mm.
And by stopping labeling foods as like good or bad and actually just tuning into them, like, how does it taste? We'll suddenly find that I had another client who like really thought she liked penguin biscuits. I don't know. And then like when she actually really stopped and was like, they just taste really like cheap. I don't like them.
They're quite
But what she
chalky.
did really like was like a chocolate brownie. So she would like make sure that, when she was with that brownie, she sat down and she really enjoyed it. And then she would
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a brilliant point, is that this idea of the food being good or bad is actually what drives the overeating,
Yeah.
because people will think, no, I shouldn't have that, it's a bad food. But then because they restrict themselves from it, they'll want it even more. Like
Yeah.
that person that your mum tells you not to date or whatever in secondary school. And then when they do have it, it compounds the guilt even worse, which drives the overeating, and the cycle kind of repeats itself, because then they'll either carry on or they'll restrict again because they feel guilty. And it's just that awful binge and restrict mindset, really, but at a smaller scale.
Yeah.
So it's such a great point. I mean, I should have told you before we got on the podcast that Domino's Pizza are the sponsor of this
Can you
podcast.
imagine? Oh, I'd be in trouble.
I know, I'm going to have to look for a new one now. So thanks for that, Laura. But yeah, just such a great point. I think, I'm conscious of your time, and we've covered so many great things already. So I guess the last thing I would ask would be around that idea of eating out and holidays, because, people come to me and they're like, I'm going on holiday in 3 months, so I want to look good. And I'm like, I can get you there, but we probably need an exit strategy, and then to help you not come back after the 2 weeks of holiday. So how do you work with clients with eating out? You mentioned a bit about eating out, like, know that you can stop and ask for the food to go, but things like holidays, parties, where there could potentially be a wider range of food, like that buffet effect. How do you help your clients cope with those strategies?
So we always talk about strategizing, and even if they've done the situation before, like, we still do it anyway. So that I get them to, they might do a bit of this first by themselves and then come back to me and we chat about it. But I ask them to do one of a couple of things. So sometimes I ask them to visualize like how they want to feel coming out of that situation. So how do they want to feel when they're on the plane home? Like, they want to feel like, oh my God, I had a great holiday, but I also made like good food choices. Like, I enjoyed some really lovely foods, but I, also like walked every day or swam. And I've kind of asked them to like embody like how they want to feel, or if it was like a meal or whatever, how do you want to feel coming home? Like, and then think about all the things that you did to feel like that. Like, what does that look like? How did you get to that space? What behaviors were it? And they might say, I got up and I swam every day, and I made a decision every night about like how many drinks I was going to drink. Like, I'm going to have like 3 drinks tonight, or there's different things for different people, but there'll be like a set of like habits or behaviors. Or I might check in and like, with my hunger and, when I'm eating. So that's like one approach that we use. And then otherwise we might just literally choose so talk about like the challenges or what they foresee as being like the difficult bits about that particular event. So if it was meal out, it might be that they know they're not going to be able to pay attention to like whether they're hungry or like their satiety, because there's so much chat going on around, and it's, you know, it's great. Or like the buffet situation, it might be like, oh my god, there's so many foods, like so then we will look at that specific challenge and think about like 2 or 3 things that might be helpful. So in the buffet thing, like one of my pieces of advice is like, go around and like look at everything first, like look what looks really good, and then put an amount on your plate and like come back with that. And then the deal is that they kind of eat that first, and then they check in with themselves, and they only go back for seconds if they're truly hungry, which never happens. But like, the point being, with the buffet thing, it's very easy to do like hand to mouth action, and then you suddenly you like lose track of what you're eating, and then that freaks people out a bit, and then that's that slippery slope. So it's just putting in like checkpoints with yourself, or they might, as you were sort of talking about earlier, know that they need to strategize more in the day so that they don't arrive really hungry. They might have like a protein rich snack before they go out, so they don't arrive feeling like they want to arm off. And I think I just encourage them to, whether it's a meal or like whether it's a holiday, is then normally just to kind of keep a little diary about how it goes, and again use everything as like a learning experience, and just keep practicing those skills. So
yeah, perfect. Yeah, exactly. It's conversations I've had with many clients as well. The party and the buffet effect is a big one, you know, because people want to enjoy themselves, and then it's reframing actually what you mean by enjoyment. Is that coming back feeling bloated and full of yourself, or is it just, as you said, like, I loved that idea of reverse engineering the way you felt. Like, okay, you're coming back from the party or you're coming back from holiday and you had an amazing time and you feel really satisfied with how it went. What caused you to have those feelings? And then people are like, well, I probably did this and this and didn't do this, and you're like, okay then, so you know.
and that forms the basis of your plan. And you know, the hardest thing, I think, and this is, you know, I think definitely like in the first couple of weeks of like, maybe you start a new plan or a lifestyle change, it's really great to not have so many times when you're going out. So for the first couple of weeks, just get into a rhythm and start practicing these habits. But then you need to go and practice keeping these habits up whilst you're out in these, what we would call high risk situations, if you like. So then it's kind of using some techniques like the reverse, kind of like, you know, the visualization or and thinking about strategies. And another really big area I think is like the alcohol, you know. So most of us are drinking, like maybe we still did when we were teenagers, or like, and most people can pinpoint a point at which like when they drink more than that, then their food decisions become really bad. So sometimes it's like looking and being like, okay, at what point in the night does it suddenly become like the fuck it effect? And then stopping, like, you know, reminding yourself before then. And sometimes, like, I'll say to a client, they write a list on their phone of like how they want to feel, and they walk into the toilet and like reread it. And it might sound like quite like, oh, that sounds like a bit of a cheesy thing to do, or a bit of a full-on thing to do. But you know what? By how we are with humans, like, we can be highly erratic in our behavior. And although we can feel like mega motivated like 1 minute, you know, another minute we can suddenly be like, you know, there's some temptation in front of us, and all of a sudden we just want the easy, fast, fun choice. So actually doing what you can to remind yourself like of your intentions and how you want to feel, I think is a great strategy. I don't think I think it's something to be applauded.
I totally agree, and it's giving people that trust in that, I think, and having the clients buy into it and then believe that they can do it as well. Like, that's such a powerful thing, is them believing that they can be successful with those things. Particularly when they're at social events and with other people who might be saying, why aren't you doing XYZ? We all know that can be kind of, you know, people don't mean to sabotage you, but inadvertently they do, because they have this random judgment of your actions for whatever reason, which could come from their own feelings of, well, I'm doing it and I feel shit about myself, so why aren't you doing the same thing? You know, but hey ho, there we go. Laura, I think this has been a great discussion. I think there's been so many takeaways for the listeners out there. For those of them that would like to know more about you and the kind of work that you're doing, particularly around the emerging stuff that you've just brought out, where are the best places for them to go?
So my website is tiltnutrition.com, and yeah, on social media, no one can ever spell this, but it's NutriTilty, which is like nutrition and tilty joined together.
Yeah.
UTRITILTY. So yeah, I'm on social media talking about various bits and bobs, and through my website I've got there's a few articles on there and kind of mindful eating. I have put together like a mindful eating course, but it's sat in my Google Drive, like it's most of the way finished. It's just sometimes other things take priority,
Yeah, of
but it's
course.
my intention at some point to make that available online as well. But yeah, come and say hello. Like if you've got any questions, I'm always happy to answer them. And try the tools. If The Joy of Half a Cookie is a great book, I think,
Yeah.
to kind of get and have a read, and it will introduce you to some techniques that the whole idea of the book is that it was her way of like putting the program into a format that people could read at home and try. And if you want to get into mindful eating, it's a great place to start reading about it, and then you can maybe try some of those techniques with the support of like a coach or a dietitian or nutritionist if that feels good.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll link your socials and website and
Yeah,
stuff in the
great.
show notes for people that can't spell.
Yeah.
And
Every time I'm like, it's such part of me is like I should change it, but then you've had it for so long. It's
yeah,
just
yeah. I've changed my handle a couple times, and I'm never doing it again. I've kind of just sat with it now.
reassuring.
Luckily Johnny isn't too bad, but a lot of people do sometimes use an H, and I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
guys. But first world problems, I guess. But yeah, I'd also highly recommend Joy of Half a Cookie, and potentially Headspace as well for those people that want
Yeah,
to try mindfulness just as a practice. So, Laura, thank you again for being on.
no problem. It's a
And
pleasure.
great, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Yeah, great. Bye bye.